Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the show this Friday. Reasons to be optimistic, continuing theme from last week. We're nearly done with January, just a couple of days to go. What a great month to put behind. And in the now weekly, well, I say weekly, second week of Daylight Watch, I'm very happy to say that today is 65 minutes longer in daylight than January the 1st. So that's something to cling to, isn't it? So that's for UK folks. But more than anything, the reason to be optimistic is that we've got another brilliant guest this week. And so I'm delighted to say that we have our very first Olympian on the show. And so I'd like to welcome Jack Green to the Places You'll Go show. Welcome, Jack.
Hello.
There we go. Good morning, and great to have you on the show.
Was that as dramatic an entrance as you wanted there, Mark?
It's pretty good. I mean, the real life lives up to the picture. Although the picture is pretty cool, I have to say. You know, there's a nice tracksuit and all that. But no, welcome, Jack. Double Olympian, should I say? Both Rio and London. What an amazing thing it must be to compete in your home Olympics. And I know we'll come on to that. In fact, Jack's pretty impressive in terms of his athletic achievements. So fourth in two Olympics, medalled in World and European Championships in the 400 meters and 400 meters hurdles. I always thought 400 meters was a horrible distance because you just got to kind of sprint and hang on. Again, I'm sure we'll hear more about what the reality of that is. But after a successful athletics career, extremely successful athletics career by any standards, Jack moved into corporate well-being and has now launched his own consultancy called OLY. And again, be fascinated to hear about that conversion process from sport to corporate world. Now, Jack has been very open about his mental health challenges through sport and its impact upon performance and health. And so impressively, with those experiences, Jack has also gone on to be an ambassador for Mind, working with young minds and head talks, all of these incredible achievements. And still, at the age of making me feel very old, Richie a little bit old, at only the age of 29 years, which is fantastic. So, Jack, it's truly wonderful to have you on the show. Great for you to be here. And I'll hand over to Richie to get us started.
Super. Well, thanks, Mark and Jack. Awesome to have you on. Honestly, it really is. And, you know, putting us to shame at 29 with all the things that you've done, a true inspiration to us in this country, and I'm sure beyond as well. So it's great to have you here this morning. We should actually have a drum roll as you come on there, Jack. So you're right, maybe get a bit more dramatic stuff sort of going on there. But look, over to you, Jack. I want to ask you the first question here. You know, the last year has been pretty difficult for all of us, but really, you know, particularly from yourself going, you know, helping now as a trainer, lots of different things in your life means that you have to be outdoors and in the out and open. Clearly, that's been quite restricted, especially travel and things like that. So tell us a little bit about how the last year has been for you.
The last year's been, well, when you think that it's a year in March that this all started, and it's also a year in March since I got into the corporate wellbeing world. So I started with BBC Studios 6 days before the first lockdown. So as you can imagine, that remit became very different very quickly. So for me, the last year's been one of growth. It's been one of change. With not running anymore, but working in well-being. That first lockdown was okay for me because I was thrown straight into the deep end in supporting our people globally at BBC Studios. But then I'd say probably this latest lockdown has actually affected me very differently because I think that idea of a lack of hope or less hope compared to that first 3 months, where I think a lot of us just expected it to be 3 months and over. So we could almost see light at the end of the tunnel. And I think why people are probably struggling now is because we have so much uncertainty, more so than we ever did before. So well-being is becoming more and more important.
Jack, can I just jump in 1 second, Mark? Sorry, I just want to pick up on the word that you used, hope. What has hope or the role of hope played in your life throughout your career?
Yeah, hope's been a huge motivator as such, and almost a purpose, because hope for me was always, you know, the hope that this might happen, and that ties into self-belief in terms of in sport. You're hopeful that you will achieve what you've aspired to achieve, and hope is a thing that I think we always have and everyone can connect on and relate to, that we always are hopeful for things to improve, change, whatever it might be. So it's a really interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, and it's right at the heart of the Star Wars series, of course. So let's not forget that. But so, I mean, very practically, Jack, lockdown has been restrictive, as Richie said. What are some of the things that you've had to stop doing, and maybe some of the things that you've been able to start doing? So maybe some silver linings, but some things that have not been possible.
I think it's allowed me to stay in the present a bit more. And for me, that was something I always wanted to work on and continue to work on, staying in the moment, staying in the now. So being able to control those things that I can control and not worry about the things that I can't, which there are so many of those things. Whereas I used to always worry about consequences, or can I control this? Can I control that? It's just not the case. And I think the other thing for me that's really helped is gratitude. I'm actually really grateful for so much in my life. And it's not that miswanting of money or materialistic things. It's things that are close to home, and grateful for the social connections I do have when we're allowed to have them in what capacity that we're allowed at the moment. And all those simple, basic things. I think it's taken us back to that basic needs, right? Which well-being is all about. It's your physical, your social, your mental and financial health. And we're looking at that and going, let's focus on these foundations, because they're actually the most important thing, not everything else that we think about.
Jack, I want to, I must admit, before this interview, I was doing a bit of research, and I was watching a video of you on YouTube talk about sort of the road and sort of your life and how you were able to, I guess, forge your career in the Olympics. And one of the things that caught my eye, or caught my ear rather, was when you said that actually in the early days, it was pretty easy for you to achieve or you felt was pretty easy to achieve a certain level and standard that you did. So to what extent do you think it was all about natural talent? Did you have to work pretty hard for it, or tell us a bit about that road towards getting to the heights that you achieved, but very much also helping us understand whether you thought it was natural talent, hard work. What are the ingredients that led to the success?
So obviously I am incredibly blessed with a physical ability. There are things in me that just work differently to others. I'm really, really grateful for that. But I'm also 6'4". That's something I can't change, and that helps me with hurdles. So when we're talking about natural ability, physical ability, fantastic. I have that. I'm very lucky. But I know more talented athletes that haven't made it than have. So one thing I won't be beaten on is that work ethic. I'm a fantastic trainer. The reason I struggle with my mental health is because I'm incredibly obsessive. I'm incredibly intense when I'm passionate about something. And those things allow me to be successful, but they also allow me, if I don't manage them, they will also put me into a difficult position sometimes. So for me, it's a blend between the two. I'm very talented. I'm very grateful for that, but I'm also, I've got a work ethic. I've always had to work for everything that I've got in terms of understanding. I wanted to be the best anyway. It wasn't about being the best locally. It was about being the best in the world. And when you get to that top level, everyone is incredibly talented and everyone works very, very hard. And the reason I said it was easy for me when I was young was because I didn't do anything that the top guys wouldn't have done themselves. So I didn't do anything special. I just believed I was on a yellow brick road, this destiny to be the best in the world, because I went from 105th as an 18-year-old to 19 years old, I was 16th in the world. And it was kind of like, oh, well, I just did what everyone else does, and I got to this stage. So that's why I thought it was easy. And I never failed before that. I always won things. So I never had to experience those down days as such, or that learning experience.
Fascinating to hear, and I can just see the glint in your eye when you talk about that the drive and moving from up to that from 105th, I think you said, to 16th. And also the 6'4" thing, you can't see it here, but Richie and I are a bit like Ant and Dec. We're both on the shorter side. So there's no hope for us, Richie. So obviously you had to work incredibly hard, but I suppose that in the end, you've had an amazing success. And so I just really want to know, what does it feel like to participate in an Olympics, including a home Olympics?
Obviously, there are so many positives. It's an amazing thing to be in a stadium with 80,000 people and with the noise around that London 2012 Olympics, not only in the stadium, but beforehand and everything. I will never get that moment again, ever. It's nothing I can replicate. It's amazing that I've had that opportunity. But the reason why I almost struggled after the Olympics, or one of many, but one of the reasons was because that was my dream, to go to an Olympic Games. From the age of 7, I was writing stories about, at 7 years old, I remember writing a story about beating Maurice Green in the 100 meters and winning the Olympics, because he was my hero at the time, because I liked, obviously he had the same surname and he was an entertainer. He was like Bolt before Bolt. And the thing was, I built it up so much in my head, and I think we all do this with everything, and it's a human thing. The grass is greener and all of that jazz. But I went into those Olympics expecting it to be like heavenly gates will open, there'll be fluffy rabbits and unicorns and rainbows. And I got out there and went, oh, it's just another track. I've just got to do the same thing I do every day. And that was actually quite hard to take, because I thought it would be that unicorns and rainbows, or like completing a game, and at the end it'd just be like, well done, you have completed all the levels, you've now, you found happiness or something like that. So I actually quite struggled, but there are so many positives to going to those Olympics, and I can tell you now, London was a damn sight better than Rio was. So I'm very lucky to have had the experience of London.
Do you know, Jack, most of us feel pressure when we have to present to a senior manager or something. I mean, let alone stand in front of 80,000 people and perform at the top of your game with other A-listers, at the same time. Can you talk a little bit about pressures, and how did you manage those pressures, and perhaps reflecting on some of the downsides?
I think more how I didn't manage those pressures a lot of the time. So for me, if we're thinking about managing pressure, we're managing expectation. Typically, the pressure and expectation is put upon ourselves. Typically, we will always put more upon ourselves than someone else will. And for me, I always then worried about the consequences, right? So I was like, well, if I don't achieve this, what will happen? And so on and so forth. That I'd end up almost freezing. We talk about fight and flight, but I'd freeze, because I was worried about, what if this doesn't go right, and I'm meant to achieve this, and I'm meant to do this, and I've built this up. And yeah, it was just something that I then had to learn. And then I started measuring myself in different ways. So I started measuring myself on, instead of results, on effort, because my whole life was about, if I win the race or I run a certain time, I'm a success. And if I don't do those two things, then I'm a failure, which is brutal, because especially when you're, as you said, the A-listers of sport, you're not always going to win. You're not always going to run a certain time. So once I started measuring myself on effort, I became a lot more consistent and a lot more positive, because then I was going into races and measuring myself rather than measuring myself against others or against a clock. Some days, we're human beings, right? Some days we're just not firing on all cylinders. We might only have 60% in the tank. So how can we demand more than that? What I can demand is I give 100% of that 60. And once I started doing that kind of technique, it became a lot easier to be successful, particularly in sport. And then that's what I've used in the corporate world as well.
It seems very resonant that, at times you just have to sort of take it easy on yourself. Do you think the majority of first-class top-flight athletes do thrive on that fear of failure? If I look at Usain Bolt, for example, he seems to not have a care in the world. Is that really true, or are all athletes somewhat reliant on that fear of failure to get to the very, very top?
I think it's a fantastic driver, in terms of that fear of failure will get you to the top quickly, but it won't keep you there.
Yeah.
Because it is negative. Negativity is like poison, right? Can only have so much before it's going to kill me. And if that's your main fuel, it's not going to work very well. So we've got to be a lot more kinder to ourselves. And also, like, if you're in a fear of failure, you're never enjoying yourself. You're never actually enjoying the moment. You're never appreciating the moment. I didn't appreciate or enjoy any of my career, which is a really sad thing. When people talking, we're here and saying, Jack, you've done really well with this and this. But I didn't appreciate any of it. I didn't enjoy any of it, because because of that fear of failure, it was about the next thing. As soon as, even if I did achieve my dream, well, now I've got a new one, which is even bigger and even better, because that's how my self-worth was made. So 100% athletes will be motivated by that, but it's not a healthy one, and it won't keep the best at the very, very top without destroying them, essentially. So I don't think it's something we should be promoting our athletes or our people to be using as a fuel.
That's a lovely, sorry, Richie, just to come in. That's a lovely thought about what gets you there versus what keeps you there. Just to tell us a small side story. I created a charity event, the Sprintathon. We were talking about it just before. A few people on this will be aware of that. And it was the most stressed I've ever been. And it was my 13-year-old daughter who sort of literally grabbed me by the shoulders about an hour before it was all supposed to kick off. And she said, Dad, make sure you enjoy it. And it seems such a trivial thing, but actually was incredibly insightful, because I wasn't enjoying it, and I wouldn't have done unless she told me to. So it's such a great lesson for everyone to hear somebody to say, you've got to enjoy it along the way. Otherwise it's gone and it's never there again. So sorry, back to you, Richie.
No, not at all. I mean, I was going to ask a similar sort of related question around insecurities, and people at the top of the game, as you've seen, and you've clearly come across so many people in your field. Do you think that there is some level of insecurity that also drives them to be able to want to get that recognition and want to get onto the top?
Yeah, most definitely. I was thinking about this earlier this morning, actually, and thinking that a lot of my initial reasons for running, because I always talk about, it's nice to win, it's nice to be told you're good, but there was a big thing about wanting to be a people pleaser, and wanting that praise and wanting love, essentially, and searching for that. And that comes from an insecurity, right? So for me, it's how do we combat that? So how do we combat that insecurity? I'm really passionate about the human being part, which you'll hear throughout this whole thing. You are a human being. I'm a human being. I just run a bit faster than the other ones. That's the only difference. There's nothing else to it. So I'm not special. I just run a bit faster. And for me, when we're looking at that human being, how are we looking after that human being? How are we developing them outside of what their career is? Because that job that you do, whether it's an athlete, whether it's whatever it is, that's just a part of you. The human being is the important part, right? And if the human being is thriving, then your professional development will thrive as well. And that's what I kind of go for with my philosophy, how I coach, how I work in well-being. But with those insecurities, it's then finding who's important to you, which opinions are important. So create your circles. This Brené Brown is fantastic about talking about vulnerability, creating those circles, and I've loved all of her work, and it's helped me a lot. And the circles, in terms of my circles, I have two of them. And that is, one is for my close friends and family, those people who have, worked particularly hard, always been around, whether the good days, bad days, they live in that circle. I care about them, I love them, I care about their opinions. My second circle is people who can relate to me. We can connect on some level. And that's not that they've been to an Olympic Games. That's not that they struggle with mental health issues. It's just that we have some connection, and they get me and I get them. So I'll care about their opinion, and anyone outside of that, you're not my problem, frankly. Your opinion is not my opinion. So it's exactly that. It's theirs. It's that other person's. It's not mine. So push that to one side. That helped hugely with my anxiety around being a role model, being insecure, having to be a certain way.
Jack, I must just jump in for one more cheeky question there on that. A lot of the time, and perhaps your industry that you've been in epitomizes this, where everyone talks about the need for hard work. And you, in fact, mentioned this at the outset of the talk, that no one could out hard work you. But actually, I wonder if that actually, when you define that hard work and you try and create a balance in all these other multifaceted aspects of your life, I often find that if I work for 12 hours a day, I get too caught in the grass and not able to see the bigger picture, which then if I lift my head out for a bit, I actually see a different perspective in it. So when you talk about hard work, I mean, even in the athletics at the top of your game, did you give yourself that time to breathe, to get out of that and then be able to dip back in with a different perspective?
I didn't, to be honest, but my understanding and how I work now and how I coach and so on, hard work, we all straight away go to what is the hardest thing I can do. Can I go on a track and destroy myself? Can I work 12-hour days? But recovery and well-being is part of your work, right? Because they allow me to then perform. So hard work is everything. Stepping off the track, I'm still doing hard work. I'm recovering. I'm eating well. I'm sleeping well. I'm making sure I'm social so that I'm fulfilled mentally. Various other things, right? So hard work isn't just that one thing that you do. It's everything. And I'd probably change it to smart work. I was very lucky that my first coach taught me how to work hard, right? Old school, real, just you run hard, you lift heavy, everything is done with a huge intensity and demanded, the best of the best. I then went to another coach in Florida who taught me how to work smart. He taught me, right, these are the times to be like that, and these are the times to recover, because you can't sustain that all the time. So for me, it's work hard, but work smart as well.
Love that.
Jack, it's very clear you've been on a big transformation journey and are a lot stronger and fitter in all respects for that. My guess is there's been some really big pivot moments in that. I think you fractured your back, and maybe that was a a critical moment. But what have been the pivot points that join the dots from where you were back then to where you are now?
So I was diagnosed with depression, bipolar tendencies, and anxiety shortly after the 2012 Olympics at 20 years old, turning 21, which, you know, is probably the start of my journey, because as I said before, that was easy. No one would learn anything. I was just an arrogant young man who thought he was the best in the world and behaved like it, quite frankly. And then I had that experience. I fractured my back. I sold everything I owned, moved to Florida to train there. Started coaching myself in the end, training on my own, using alcohol to self-medicate because I couldn't be on antidepressants because they wouldn't allow me to run fast. Not that alcohol helps you to run fast, but it was a better alternative at the time. You know, and I essentially bankrupted myself to be able to fund my career. And yet, you know, I still ended up struggling again in end of 2018. And that was because I never managed my mental health once. I ran away from it. I would hide from it, thinking that, yes, I'd gained some awareness, but I didn't actually do anything about it. When I took my 2 years out from the sport, all I did was hide and run from my mental health, because I thought if I take myself away from the high pressure environment, I'll get better. But I didn't actually learn anything. So in 2018, I then struggled again, and probably the worst I've ever been. And I decided to see a counsellor for the first time since I'd been diagnosed. And I just learned so much at that point, and it's effectively saved my life. But one of the questions that was asked of me was why would I'd stay in the sport? Why would you go to the next Olympics? Because in my head, I was going to go to Tokyo. I even said to people, I'm going to destroy myself to win a medal there, which is really sad that I said that. But that's what I said at the time. That showed my drive and how sometimes it wasn't particularly the best thing in the world for me. But the only answers I could come up with as why I'd stay in the sport were all external reasons. Because society says so, because everyone thinks it's glamorous, because I'm turning 28 and that's when you hit your peak between 28 and 32. It's like someone said to me, it's like throwing away the winning lottery ticket. What are you doing? But I couldn't come up with one internal reason. There wasn't one thing inside me that said, this is why I do it. So I made the decision to retire at 28, which obviously was, I think, is my bravest decision yet, because that goes against what people understand and what society thinks. So that's as quick as I can go through kind of the struggles, and obviously not in too much detail, but that's kind of the journey of the last however many years.
Jack, to be honest, man, and it's just super inspiring to hear you say that, because I think all of us on some level struggle with the sort of the expectations of the outside world and what people are kind of, whispering in your ear versus actually what we probably truly feel in our hearts. And I think, you took that decision probably more from the heart. And for yourself, and kind of almost drowning out those voices. And by the way, I don't think many people do that. So what you've been able to do on that front is truly inspiring, to be honest. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about the next stage of that journey and what your intentions are to help other people perhaps realize what's in their heads and hearts.
So I've always had a passion for helping people. Ever since I struggled. I didn't care about other people when I was young in that stage up to 2012. It was only about me, and I would have walked over people to get there quite happily. But as soon as I struggled, it made me realize I was a human being, made me realize that other people struggle as well. That if I can struggle with this, then of course other people are, because I'm the person that everyone thinks wouldn't struggle. So a huge why, purpose, passion around helping others kind of came about, and I became a keynote speaker, sharing my story with some of the biggest companies in the world, and sharing those life lessons that I've learned along the way. I started working with the government on some mental health reform in elite sport, and an ambassador for mental health charities. And I was very lucky that when I retired, only a few months later, I was contacted on LinkedIn and given the opportunity to be the head of wellbeing at BBC Studios. As I said, I started just before lockdown, and I ended up being responsible for 30 offices globally and 5,000 people or so as my first job, and taking my passion into that. And I'm not a corporate person. I don't want to be. I won't act like one. It's part of my strength that I'm not. But it was definitely a challenge. So I worked with BBC Studios, helped them for 7 months. But I don't enjoy full-time work. It doesn't make sense to me. I'd rather just work really hard, get my job done, and have a bit more autonomy and flexibility on my life. So I decided to set up OLY, which has only been going for 3 weeks or so. In an official capacity, I've been working with other companies off my own name beforehand. But the whole point is, I just saw a space for well-being that was around performance. Well-being for me has always been a bit soft and fluffy. It's a nice to have, instead of it being seen as a performance measure, which is, if your well-being is right, as I said earlier about looking after the human being, if the well-being is the foundation, performance is a tip, then why aren't we looking after well-being? Because if people are in a good place, they'll end up performing really well. I can guarantee you that. So for me, it was, can I bring something to the organizations, to people, around understanding that well-being and performance go hand in hand. So I'm doing that with OLY now through various different services, and it's fantastic to be able to help as many companies as possible, hopefully, and as many people. But it also gives me the flexibility to do probably the thing I'm most passionate about in life at the moment, which is coaching. So I coach an Olympic athlete who'll be representing Italy in Tokyo at her 3rd Olympics. So the plus of having some autonomy and flexibility on my time is I can still work with her, which I couldn't do when I was in full-time work. So I'm very lucky that all my careers have had a lot of purpose, a lot of that why, which brings a lot of meaning, which, I think is the main thing that kind of brings success for a lot of people, is if their work has some meaning.
Well, lovely to hear about all the amazing things that you're doing. I'm going to squeeze in 2 questions. You talked about a purpose of helping people. Is that a general thought, or do you have a specific set of words? Because in corporate land, we're often encouraged to be very precise and defined about a purpose. So I'm curious about that. And then the second broader question is, what are your dreams for OLY?
So mine is simply, my passion comes from the fact that I don't want anyone to ever feel the way I did. And the fact that I now have the knowledge that I can help people in actually quite simple ways never feel as bad. So I was at a point where I didn't want to live. Now that's terrible for someone who, when we're looking at success and we have that stigma, someone who had the success that I didn't want to live. So that's kind of where my purpose goes. And I could probably turn it into something that sounds quite nice and shiny, but it's as simple as, I want to be able to help people with the knowledge that I have. And then in terms of OLY, what's the dream? The reason I started it instead of just trading off my own name is I wanted to have some legacy for what I do, because everything I do at the moment is Jack Green. And I can only do so much on my own. And now obviously I'll still be trading off that for quite some time as OLY builds and grows. But I wanted to have some legacy that was more than just me, was something that grew bigger than me.
Hey Jack, you're talking to a team of marketers here, and actually, your leverage point of Jack Green into OLY is going to be perfect for you as that leverage point to build up something bigger. So I wish you all the best on that. I'm sure it's going to be mega. I just want to take one minute out just to basically say thank you to everybody who's joined us this morning. It's absolutely great to have all of you here to hear a little bit more about Jack's story. I just want to call out a couple of people who were with us week on week. Please do join us week on week. We got great people who come on. So people like Barney, Catherine Marsh, great to see you here. Probably the first time, I think. Dario, Gabrielle, George, Jess, another regular. John, another regular here as well. Phil, Raju, Richard, Saffron, Sam, Trina as well. Great to have you all here this morning. I know it's early for a lot of you. So just such a pleasure. But back onto it, Raju has asked a question, and you may have covered this. So if perhaps keep this to a few lines. So he asks, this pandemic has taught me that it's perfectly okay not to be okay, and that is about being vulnerable. How do you handle such situations and build on them to make it better?
Yeah, for me, I think actually what I'd like to say is around vulnerability. Vulnerability isn't about one person being vulnerable. It's how it's received. So you think about this when someone might be opening up or being vulnerable with you, because we always learn from our experiences. That's how we work as human beings. So if I am vulnerable to someone and I don't get the right response that I perceive as the right response, or it's shut down or it's dismissed, then straight away we've broken that kind of trust, that belief in vulnerability. So for me, it's think about not only when you can be vulnerable, but when you can accept vulnerability as well.
Great thought.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'm Jack. Just so you know, there's some great comments coming in here. I'm just going to read out one. Thanks, Vicky. Jack, your honesty is truly inspiring. You've helped our organisation globally, and would highly recommend you to anyone listening. So good plug there. But I think well deserved. I'm not sure what organisation it is, Vicky. It's fine to say that is. And then hi, Mark. I've got a question from Mark. Actually, I'm going to jump to a question here. So which we kind of touched on, but I think maybe there's more to say. Maybe. You talked about being a people pleaser and wanting to please your parents and seeking the love of your parents. Can you say a little bit more about what that influence was? Because we all want to, get the adulation and praise and notice of our parents. So how did that kind of flow through?
Mine was more about other people. So a single parent family. So it's just my mum, who's also a leading child wellbeing and behavioural specialist. So she knows what she's doing regarding that. And one thing, I might not have had certain things in life, but the one thing I always had from my family was, love constantly. That's the one thing we had in abundance, and I'm very grateful for. And I think it was just seeking that love and acceptance outside of that, then being loved and by everyone. And I think it's because I was a perfectionist, I then wanted everything to be perfect. So I wanted everyone to think I was perfect, and I wanted my behaviors to be seen that way, and so on. So I think that's more where it came from. And, if speaking with my mum now, there's things that she would have done differently to help me change that when I was young and change that perfectionist trait and that fear of failure. But that's the beauty of hindsight, isn't it? We know about them afterwards, but yeah.
Jack, I've got to ask another question coming from Richard Brown. So he says, having been through the process, do you think it is possible to reach the very top in sport and stay there without some kind of insane drive?
Yes, I think that's a tough one, actually. I think you have to have some element of insane drive, but you have to be able to manage it. That's the difference. It's kind of what we were talking about earlier, right? That insane drive might get you there, but it won't keep you there because it will burn you out. So how do I manage it when I'm there or even on the way? How do you manage those strengths that you have that actually are more like, we talk about sports people being superheroes and so on, which is wrong, but we all have superpowers, things that we do best. Maybe managing those superpowers so that we're not constantly having them on show and having them going at 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, all great questions. Please keep them coming. Typically better than Richie and my questions. So all good. Great one from Jody. You talked about often it's just the simple things. So Jody's question is there one behavior that you continue to practice on a daily basis to keep your mental health on top form?
I've just started using mindfulness, which I always refused to do before because it seemed too soft. And I was also still a perfectionist still am to a degree. I have to manage it. But I used to think that I had to do mindfulness well, in terms of I had to be like a monk where there were no thoughts in my brain and so on and so forth. So I used to just not do it. So I've started doing mindfulness every day. I got rid of all my social media accounts other than my business ones, which only have about 3 followers, so I don't spend any time on them. So I got rid of all my social media accounts so I could stay more in the present and not worry about that social comparison, that relativity. And then the other things, I got myself a dog when I moved back from Florida back to the UK, so that I had a responsibility that wasn't myself, so that I would get out in nature, and that's something I do a lot. I'm very lucky to live by the sea, so I spend a lot of time on the beach with the dog, just so I can escape life sometimes. I think escapism is quite important as long as we do it in a healthy way.
I guess you have a dog that needs quite a lot of exercise as opposed to a pug or something.
No, luckily she's very lazy at times, so she does as she's told. But yeah, we do have our big walks, though she is faster than me at sprinting, but the long stuff, yeah, I'm better at that. So she doesn't come on the long runs anymore.
Brilliant. What a lovely competitor that you have in your next chapter of your life to be able to keep that going. Jack, I want to take you back for just a moment, because when I watched you a bit earlier on in one of your interviews, you talked a little bit about the difficulty between sort of on the one hand, having the adulation and almost celebrity status, walking into that Olympic arena with those 80,000 people. And then all of a sudden, in the next week or two, whatever it may be, you're back to being, Jack in your house, pretty isolated and alone. How were you able to sort of deal with that extraordinarily high and low perpetually?
The Olympics is like, when you leave an Olympics, it's like jumping off a cliff, because you go from being, you've been probably in a holding camp beforehand for at least a month. So you're being cooked for, your room's clean because you're in hotels. You've got all people around you who are, a majority of them are friends, or at least people that you can connect with because they love athletics. So you always have that common conversation as such. So it's really tough, because then it's literally London, which was huge, I got the train home on the last day back to Bath, just got on the train with my kit and off we went. And you're like, oh, right, I was special like 10 seconds ago. Now I feel that I'm not. And yeah, I think as a young athlete, the first Olympics, that was really hard because I didn't have much emotional intelligence or experience. And I believed the hype. I believed I was special. So then all these things that were happening in terms of jump off that cliff were telling me and kind of affirming that you're not special. That was hard. Whereas, once I'd learned that, I knew that was the case, and I knew that I wasn't just an athlete. I knew there was more to me, and that then changed when I left the Rio Olympics and various other championships, because it happens at the other champs as well. And it was fine, because I knew actually I'm just going back to what I always do, and that's fine. And every now and then I get wheeled out for some entertainment, and understanding it was like that rather than, this is how my life's going to be moving forward.
Jack, I'm going to read out another comment from Mike this time. Incredibly sincere, so inspiring and engaging. Jack, really grateful for you sharing such personal experiences in such a constructive and honest way. Huge help to so many. One of my key takeaways from the session will be how brutal elite sport is. Is sport or athletics, in general, is elite sport doing enough? I know you're trying to be part of the solution to that, but is it doing enough, or too many people being left with too many battle scars?
Yeah, I think if people think corporate is far behind on well-being, then you don't want to go into sport, because you're treated as a commodity. Quite frankly, you are a number. As soon as you can't do that number, there'll be someone who's younger and coming through that can do it instead. And see you later, you're not our problem anymore. There isn't much of a duty of care as such. So there's also the stigma around it. As I said, I struggled because of male sports person successful. You're not meant to be weak. You're not meant to struggle, and so on. So I think the more people speak, the better. Some sports are doing better than others. A sport like cricket are doing much better because they're a lot further on that journey. If you look back, quite a few cricketers went public with their mental health issues, quite a while ago now. So they're further on that journey. Whereas Olympic sports struggle and individual sports struggle because of the lack of finances that's involved, and then the lack of team. I completely understand the difficulty, because you've got X amount of athletes and we're all over the place. We're not in one place where you can just go, right, I've got my 50 people here and we see them every day. We can do this, this, and this. They've got that difficulty of individuals all over. So I think sport needs to do a lot more. I think it will, because I think the generation's coming through, and with the society now, we're getting a better awareness of mental health, which will then lead to better education in mental health. So I think hopefully that will change in the near future.
Jack, you talk about a number of different sports and perhaps where they are in the evolution of managing mental health. I just want to kind of ask, and perhaps you do or don't have a view, and if you don't, it's fine. But we treat certain sports personalities and people like demigods in many ways, and I think about footballers as being perhaps the epitome of that. So, I mean, how do you think sort of people like that, who not only have to stay top of their game in a professional sense, but also then thereafter have to sort of manage personal image, brand, and that celebrity status? I mean, do you think that sort of does that go to the head even more? Do you think it's even more challenging, or I'd love to get your thoughts.
I think footballers have the worst job in the world, quite frankly, to be, with the amount of kind of skepticism around them, and they shouldn't be paid this, and the amount of noise constantly, and you're in the public eye, and the abuse that they get. Like, no, thank you. And as you said, the hard thing that you get for a lot of young sports people now is we have social media, and it's always about, you have to be a certain brand. Your sponsors are now picking you up depending on your follower count rather than your ability or your potential ability. It's more about, all those superficial things that actually aren't important, but we've put value on them. And that's hard for a young person and sports people, because all they want to do is go and do their sport. Yet they have to deal with all this rubbish. So that's why you're seeing more in terms of their management agencies and so on controlling that. But then the sad thing about that, and you see it with media training, is then we don't get authentic people, right? Because we're not allowed to see the real them because of how it might be perceived and so on. And I think that's really sad, because some of those personalities will be amazing and the people we want to see. But because of the world that we've created, we've created this perfect world that's just damaging for everyone.
Yeah, here. We were 8:43, so I'm going to ask one question. Maybe we could squeeze one more in if anyone's got anything burning. But I just wanted to finish on, given everything that you've been through, how do you go about setting goals that are, because you're clearly ambitious and intelligent and successful, and aspirational. How do you set goals that are meaningful and help you to strive, but are still realistic and keep you grounded? How do you get that balance?
So the way I do it and how I talk to people, and it's real simple stuff. You'll know this. I'll just be, confirming stuff you already know. But look, you want something at the top of the mountain, right? I want a really big dream, because that's something that gets me excited. But if I look at the top of that mountain, I think, whoa, that's a long way. I'm not sure if I can get up this. So then it's about that staying in the present, staying in the now. So understanding that every step you take is progress towards that dream. It's always something working towards. If we looked at it as like a loading bar, it's cool, like, right, there's 1% that's loaded by me doing this today, rather than looking at the top and going, well, why am I not 100% yet? Well, it's because there's a journey that goes. And sometimes that will be a long journey. Some people, it will take a very long time. Some people, it will take no time at all. But for me, if you break it down into bite-sized chunks as such, it becomes so much easier to stay in the moment, stay motivated, move forward, because it's not overwhelming you.
Wow. Jack, honestly, the time has absolutely flown by. And I certainly couldn't be more inspired walking into a Friday, the rest of my Friday morning and into the weekend. So genuinely, absolutely thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I know that all the people watching would feel exactly the same. I just want to kind of a few recaps of some of the key takeaways from me. So the one was measure on effort. By the way, the corporate world has an interesting space on that and take on that. Whether they do or they don't. But I love the notion of measuring based on effort, because that helps you to plan better. Negativity is a poison. It's a lovely sort of phrase, and that's something you should take away. What gets you there, and perhaps Richard Brown talking about sort of insanity, but what gets you there won't keep you there, and how do you manage that process through? Your take from hard work into smart work was great, far more holistic in that thought. Accept the vulnerabilities that exist. Have some level of escapism. So if we see you running down a Folkestone beach, we know what you're doing, and sort of incremental elements every day lead to great things. Jack, that's all from me. But thank you again. I'll hand over to Mark.
Yeah, Richie, you caught it really well. It's been a very humbling experience having you on the show, Jack, and the comments reflect that. A couple of things that also caught my ear as well. You met the point about fear of failure being a poison, but being in the present, having gratitude, smart work. Making sure you enjoy it, and every step is progress. Let go of things that are not in your control. That notion of circles, love that. I honestly, Jack, it's peppered with wisdom and insight. Can't thank you enough for coming on the show. It's been brilliant to have you on. So thank you so much again on behalf of everybody.
Thank you for having me. And if anyone wants to reach out to me, then you can find me on OLY, which is OLYWEL. So 1 L on well. But if people wanted to reach out, that's where I'll be.
Yeah, I think you've already heard from before. I think it was, I can't remember who it was. I'll just quickly check back now. You heard from, it was Vicky about the value that Jack can bring. So thank you again, Jack. Just as a trailer for next Friday, obviously we're on every week. We've got Carrie Longton. Delighted to have Carrie on the show. Carrie co-founded Mumsnet 20 years ago, grew it into the UK's biggest network for parents. She's also a survivor of breast cancer, and we'll talk vividly about her trials and tribulations next week. So hopefully see you on the show next week and have a fantastic weekend. And on a final note, thank you once more, Jack.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend, everyone.